friends, it's me again, it's Pearl Kupe, and I'm here to talk to you about some recent amendments that were made to some concerning regulations. They were gazetted by Dr. Nkosazana Dlamini-Zuma, and they're kind of spreading some bit of panic and a little bit of fear. First of all, I want to encourage all of us in South Africa, don't panic, don't fear. We must remain alert, we must remain vigilant. First thing I do want to say about the regulations is that they are backed by the Disaster Management Act. And the Disaster Management Act is a statute. So they get their strength from the statute, the Disaster Management Act of 2002. And I want to say this because I've seen some WhatsApp messages being circulated to say they're not law and people shouldn't worry. Well, we should be concerned because they do have the strength. They are enforceable because they are attached to the statute, the Disaster Management Act. Second thing I want to say is that the really concerning provision deals with the substitution of Section 6 of the regulations. And Section 6 really talks to the aspect of refusal of treatment, and then what happens? Isolation. So it's talking about an instance where somebody tests positive for COVID-19 and they have symptoms also of COVID-19 or are symptomatic, so-called. Then in that instance, those confirmed COVID-19 cases cannot refuse, according to this regulation, they cannot refuse to be given treatment and they cannot refuse to be isolated. So that's really what this provision is saying, that if you test positive for COVID-19, you have symptoms, then you can actually be isolated for 48 hours, and that isolation can even be extended with a warrant. So if somebody goes to court, a so-called enforcement officer goes to court, they can actually extend that 48 hours. And you can now remain in a health facility for a longer period. Couple of concerning things that I want to raise around these regulations. Number one, they do not make any sense. It was just a couple of weeks ago that we saw the same COGTA and National Command Council release some new regulations whereby they were actually downgrading COVID and saying that we had herd immunity, or we had immunity of between 60 to 80%. So if we have immunity of between 60 to 80%, why is there a need now to force people into isolation and to also force treatment upon them? It doesn't make sense. It shows a government that actually doesn't know what they're doing. On one hand, they are reducing the COVID protocols, and then 2 weeks later, they are increasing the same COVID protocols. Secondly, the second problem around this issue is around saying that if you test positive for COVID, and they talk about laboratory tests, well, that in itself is a problem because we know that there are false positive tests. So that is not something that one can rely on. What about those who test positive, but they are false positives? Have you actually given thought to that and considered that? Third thing that is very concerning about these regulations is the aspect of forced detention, that you can forcibly be detained in a health facility for a minimum period of 48 hours and longer if a warrant is issued. Forced detention is against constitutional entrenched rights in the Bill of Rights in Chapter 2. So is forced treatment. You cannot force somebody to be treated whilst they are in forced detention. This smacks of dictatorial tendencies. This smacks of authoritarian methods. This smacks of totalitarian methods. And they're all against our constitutionally entrenched rights of freedom of movement, freedom of association. So again, we're going back to tyranny. This is tyranny at its best. The other thing I want to raise up as just challenges is to say that this is both impractical and it's unnecessary. What we are doing essentially is clogging up health facilities, clogging up judicial facilities where people have to go and apply for court warrants unnecessarily. Come on, South Africa. Come on, government. Come on, Hurmente. Nations around the world are going in one direction, and that direction is to actually take away the COVID protocols, minimize them, and in many instances do away with them completely. Why now, South Africa? Why would we now actually increase and bring in more stringent COVID protocols when we have the least statistics? If Britain, UK can, with all their COVID cases, can do away with COVID protocols, we should be following suit. In fact, we should have done it sooner. So come on, South Africa, wake up. Vuka, South Africa, let's wake up. Kenako, Simunye, we are one. Let's make sure that we do away with the protocols.